March 6, 1944. The Berlin sky was deceptively calm, the kind of quiet that hides chaos. Inside the Luftwaffe operations room, General Adolf Galland stared at the radar screens, his eyes narrowing. Hundreds of blips crawled across the display, Allied bombers creeping closer from England, 580 miles away. He allowed himself a faint, confident smile. This was routine. The B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators were lumbering giants, slow and heavy at 25,000 feet, far beyond their fighter escort. His Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs would tear through them once they reached German airspace. But then, just after 12:30 p.m., the impossible appeared. Small, rapid blips darted alongside the bombers, weaving with uncanny precision. Single-engine fighters, out of range, out of logic, yet there they were, silver P-51 Mustangs guarding the bombers over Berlin. Galland felt the first chill of unease. He had commanded fighter squadrons since the Spanish Civil War, outmaneuvered the RAF in the Battle of Britain, and understood every nuance of aerial combat. And now he realized the rules had changed. The secret behind these Mustangs wasn't luck. In 1942, American engineers replaced their Allison engines with the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same power plant that propelled the Spitfire. It could deliver almost 1,500 horsepower at 25,000 feet, where most engines gasped for oxygen. Britain couldn't produce enough for the Americans, so Detroit's Packard Motor Car Company built them by the thousand. By early 1944, 4,000 Merlins rolled out every month, identical in precision and strength. Germany, by contrast, managed just 1,200 fighters of all types monthly. The writing on the wall wasn't just technical, it was industrial. That morning, 658 billions 17s and 72 billions 24s climbed into the skies over eastern England, escorted by 801 fighters. By 11:42 a.m., the bomber stream crossed the Dutch coast. Everything seemed predictable. Standard Luftwaffe procedure dictated waiting until the bombers were deep inside German territory, out of reach of their escorts, then striking hard. But at 12:37, Galland's radar revealed a nightmare. The impossible was real. Mustangs were still there, slicing through the sky west of Berlin, perfectly positioned to protect their payloads. Galland called Duritz Airfield. "Identify those contacts," he barked. "Single-engine fighters." P-51s, came the answer. He barely allowed himself a breath. These planes shouldn't have been here. They didn't have the fuel for a round trip from England. Yet they were, and they were lethal. Within minutes, Galland ordered every fighter available in the Berlin defense zone to scramble. 160 BF, 109 G6S, and FW-192 roared in. The air from JG-11, JG-300, and other squadrons, engines screaming, guns primed. The plan: punch through the bomber formation, ignore the escorts, destroy as many bombers as possible before they could react. In October 1943, the Luftwaffe had succeeded in similar attacks, shooting down dozens of bombers. But this was March 1944. The sky had changed. By 1:05 p.m., the first German fighters closed in on the bomber stream. Major Gapspect led 32 Bf 109 seconds in a head-on assault against the lead B-17s. The tactic was textbook: high approach, short burst, quick retreat. But before they could strike, 8 Mustangs from the 357th Fighter Group descended from 28,000 feet. They had altitude, speed, and surprise. The German fighters didn't stand a chance. In less than 2 minutes, 4 Bf 109 seconds were down, 3 more crippled. Specht's attack collapsed under the precision of the Mustangs. The bombers continued, untouched, cutting across Berlin like steel ghosts. At 1:18 p.m., reports of German losses trickled in: 4 fighters down, 7 pilots missing, 0 bombers destroyed. The technology disparity was clear. The P-51's Packard Merlin produced full power at high altitude, while the BMW 800 and 1 radials in FW-190 seconds and the DB-65s in BF 109 seconds faltered above 20,000 feet. They were slower, weaker, and now hopelessly outnumbered. Galland realized the scale of the threat. Intelligence had estimated around 150 P-51s in the 8th Air Force. Reality: 238 Mustangs swarmed over Berlin, covering every angle, every altitude, every approach. By 1:40 p.m., Galland decided he had to see it for himself. He took to the air in his FW-198, engines roaring, climbing through 15,000 feet over the western outskirts. Contrails painted the sky, white streaks of both bombers and fighters. Radio chatter crackled incessantly, German voices strained with panic and urgency, alerting positions, calling for backup, reporting losses. At 2:18 p.m., he spotted them. A formation of 36 billions 70 in tight defensive boxes, their silver hulls glinting in the sun. Above and around them, weaving in protective pairs, were the P-51s. Their speed, their precision, their sheer presence stunned him. Galland pushed his throttle forward, climbing toward the bombers, feeling the weakness of his own engine at this altitude. His FW-190, a formidable machine at low levels, struggled. As the BMW 801 gasped, altitude sapping its strength, two Mustangs turned toward him. They didn't dive recklessly. They used altitude and speed to control the engagement, dictating every move. Galland had no choice but to dive, pushing toward lower altitudes for survival. The Mustangs followed, but only to maintain their patrol. Their mission was the bombers, and they executed it flawlessly. Galland circled, watching in disbelief as German fighters tried, and failed, again and again, to penetrate the protective screen. Bombers pressed on toward their targets in Berlin, untouched and unstoppable. The distant thunder of bombs began to roll across the city at 2:38 p.m., striking industrial targets with chilling accuracy. Factories, refineries, vital infrastructure. American precision daylight bombing, enabled by these escorting Mustangs, was changing the war. Galland landed at 2:55 p.m., stepping onto the tarmac at Derberitz. Around him, pilots climbed from mangled fighters, shaken, some wounded, exhausted. A young lieutenant walked past and muttered, almost as a confirmation, "They're everywhere, General. We can't break through." By 3:30 p.m., the bombers had retreated westward, still under Mustang escort. The Luftwaffe's tally was devastating. 160 fighters launched, 66 downed, 9 pilots dead, 18 wounded, 19 missing. The Americans lost only 11 bombers and 5 fighters. Galland returned to headquarters staring at the numbers. It wasn't bravery, or skill, or even tactics anymore, it was math. The Americans had outproduced, outtrained, and out-engineered Germany. The P-51 Mustang wasn't simply a fighter plane. It was the embodiment of industrial power, precision engineering, and relentless strategy. While Germany rationed fuel, limited pilot training, and struggled to maintain quality in scattered factories, the United States produced thousands of identical, powerful fighters, manned by well-trained pilots with endless supply lines. Galland understood in that moment, watching the contrails fade over Berlin, the air war was lost. The skies belonged to the Americans, and nothing Germany could muster would change that. The afternoon of March 6, 1944, stretched on like a nightmare for the Luftwaffe. Galland, still on edge, reviewed the loss reports, each line a dagger. 41% of his fighters had been destroyed in a single mission. Experienced pilots, men who had survived the toughest aerial battles for years, were gone, missing, or wounded. Replacement aircraft would take weeks to arrive. Replacement pilots, skilled enough to survive American air power, months. And the Americans wouldn't wait. They would be back tomorrow, the day after, again and again, hammering at Germany's heart. The problem wasn't just the P-51's performance. It was the combination of power, range, and relentless numbers. At 25,000 feet, the Packard Merlin engines in the Mustang produced 1,490 horsepower, keeping them fast and agile where German planes faltered. BMW 801 seconds and Daimler-Benz DB65 struggled at altitude, losing speed and climb rate. In a head-to-head fight, the P-51 could outclimb, outrun, and outmaneuver them, and there were hundreds more than intelligence had predicted. Galland had always trusted tactics and skill, but now he saw clearly that those alone couldn't win this war. The Americans had industrial firepower on their side, and it was overwhelming. 2 days later, March 8th, Galland met with Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister. Speer laid out the stark reality. In February 1944, Germany had produced 1,600 single-engine fighters. The United States, over 2,300, just counting P-51 seconds and P-47 seconds. The gap in production was already catastrophic, and it wasn't just airplanes, it was pilots. While German trainees barely received 100 hours of flight time before being sent into combat, American pilots had 4 times that. Quality versus quantity, skill versus endurance, and the balance was tipping violently against Germany. Galland absorbed the numbers and shook his head. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Speer had no answer. Germany was trapped in a war of attrition it could not win. Every raid, every loss, every destroyed pilot widened the gap. Each day, the Luftwaffe's wings grew thinner, more fragile, and above it all, the P-51 seconds prowled the skies, silent predators, striking terror into every German pilot who dared to take off. Back in Berlin, The airfields were a scene of chaos. Fighters that survived the raid returned smoking, engines sputtering, guns jammed, tires shredded from rough landings. Pilots stumbled out of cockpits, exhausted and dazed, their faces pale, hands shaking. The radio still crackled with fragments of combat reports, another squadron down, another group missing. The city below had been battered, its factories scarred, its defenders humiliated. Galland moved through the tarmac like a ghost, watching, calculating, knowing that every day like this brought Germany closer to collapse. By March 1944, the United States had solved the range problem. Drop tanks extended the P-51 seconds reach, allowing them to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. No factory was safe. No city was beyond the reach of precision daylight bombing. Galland remembered his confrontation with Hermann Göring over the raid. The Reichsmarschall refused to believe what Galland had seen with his own eyes. Single-engine fighters couldn't possibly make it to Berlin, Galland had insisted. He had been there in the air, seen the Mustangs, counted the formations, hundreds, unstoppable. Göring had been silent for a long, heavy moment before muttering the words Galland had feared to hear. If what you say is true, then we have lost the air war. The March 6th raid wasn't a miracle weapon in action. It was the product of industrial might and engineering genius. The Packard Merlin engines, produced in Detroit's 3.5 million square foot factory, operated to exact tolerances, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, each delivering consistent 1,490 horsepower at altitude. Germany's factories, scattered and bombed repeatedly, couldn't hope to match that. Engines were hand-built, quality inconsistent, performance unpredictable. Resources were dwindling: chromium, nickel, molybdenum, rubber, high-octane fuel. Each loss in the air echoed down to the factories and training schools on the ground, a chain reaction Germany could not reverse. And yet, Galland did not give up. He continued to fight, even as the numbers stacked against him became insurmountable. Over the next months, the Luftwaffe struggled to defend Germany against increasingly frequent and larger raids. Every mission, every sortie, was a desperate gamble. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe could muster only 319 fighters to oppose 5,000 Allied aircraft over Normandy. The balance of power was broken. In the fall of 1944, Galland was relieved of command after repeated clashes with Göring. Orwer's strategy. He formed an elite unit, Jagdwehr Band 44, flying the new Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter. It was faster than anything the Allies had, capable of 540 miles per hour. But the jet came too late. In too few numbers, 1,400 produced, only 200 seeing combat. Galland's final mission in April 1945 saw him shoot down a B-26 Marauder for his 104th and last confirmed kill before a P-47 round shattered his knee, forcing him to crash land. 12 days later, Germany surrendered. After the war, Galland reflected on that day over Berlin. The bombers had destroyed factories, but it was the P-51s that had truly broken the Luftwaffe. They annihilated seasoned pilots who could never be replaced. They forced production underground, scattering quality and reducing effectiveness. They created a sky where no German pilot could operate safely, where industrial mathematics overpowered courage, tactics, and skill. The Mustang wasn't the fastest, most heavily armed, or most maneuverable fighter, but it had range, numbers, and an unmatched industrial backbone. On March 6, 1944, it made history. It marked the beginning of the end for German air superiority. By May, the Luftwaffe had lost control of its own skies. By September, it no longer existed as a strategic force. The P-51 flew more combat sorties than any other Allied fighter, escorting bombers, destroying aircraft in the air and on the ground, and shaping the outcome of the war. Galland survived the war, living to 1996. He would always remember March 6, the day the skies over Berlin turned against Germany, the day he understood that the war was no longer about skill or bravery. It was about numbers, machines, and the unstoppable reach of American industry. The weeks following March 6, 1944, were a grim confirmation of what Galland had feared. Every day, the skies above Germany belonged more to the Americans than to the Luftwaffe. P-51 Mustangs shadowed bombers on every mission, stretching the reach of the 8th Air Force deeper into the Reich. Factories once thought safe now burned under precision daylight raids. Rail yards, refineries, aircraft plants, nothing was beyond reach. German pilots who survived one raid faced the grim reality of the next. Fuel shortages, insufficient training, and overwhelming enemy numbers. Germany's industrial and logistical weaknesses were laid bare. While the US produced thousands of P-51 seconds and trained tens of thousands of pilots. With ample flying hours, Germany struggled to replace its lost aircraft and seasoned men. Fuel rationing meant that new Luftwaffe pilots barely had enough flight time to survive a single engagement. The result was predictable. The veterans were exhausted, scattered, and increasingly rare. Each sortie became a desperate gamble. The P-51 seconds did not just escort bombers, they hunted German fighters, eroding the Luftwaffe's strength with deadly efficiency. In Berlin, the aftermath of raids became routine. Factories were gutted, smoke and debris marked the streets, and civilians looked to the skies with a mixture of fear and resignation. Galland, walking among his pilots and crews, felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. He had fought for years, survived the battles of Spain, France, and Britain, but now the war had shifted. The Americans had solved the unsolvable problem of fighter range. Their industrial engine was unstoppable. Every loss in the air amplified the pressure on the ground. Every destroyed pilot meant Germany could not replace skill fast enough. By May 1944, the Luftwaffe had lost control of its own airspace. By June, as Allied forces landed in Normandy, German air defense could only muster a fraction of the opposition needed to counter thousands of Allied aircraft. The P-51 seconds were relentless, clearing skies, securing bomber missions, and systematically dismantling German air power. The once feared Luftwaffe, built on skill, experience, and daring, was reduced to fragmented wings, struggling to defend a country they could no longer reach with confidence or consistency. Galland continued to fly, even in desperation. The Me-262 jet offered a glimmer of hope, speed unmatched by Allied aircraft, but it was too late and too scarce. Only 200 jets ever saw combat. He flew his last mission in April 1945, downing a B-26 Marauder, only to be crippled by enemy fire. Weeks later, Germany surrendered. The air war had been lost, not by a single failure, but by the unrelenting combination of American engineering, production, and strategy. Reflecting after the war, Galland described March 6, 1944, as the day the Luftwaffe's fate was sealed. The P-51 Mustang had become more than a plane. It was a symbol of unstoppable industrial power meeting tactical execution. It didn't just protect bombers. It shattered morale, destroyed veteran pilots, and forced Germany into a losing spiral of attrition. Galland's words echoed the lesson the Luftwaffe could not escape. Bravery alone could not match numbers, range, and production. The skies belonged to the Americans, and their Mustangs were the proof. From that day until the end of the war, the P-51s escorted every major bombing mission, shaping the course of battles, crippling Germany's infrastructure, and ensuring that daylight raids became a deadly certainty. German pilots fought bravely, but against unmatched numbers, superior engines, and endless supplies, courage was no longer enough. By 1945, the Luftwaffe had ceased to be a decisive force in the air, its wings clipped by mathematics that Germany could no longer defy. Galland survived the war, living until 1996, but the memory of Berlin's skies on that March afternoon remained with him forever. He had seen the turning point the day the P-51 Mustangs flew over Berlin, escorted bombers with surgical precision, and ended Germany's reign in the air. It wasn't just a battle. It was a demonstration of what industrial might and engineering ingenuity could achieve in war. Courage, skill, and tradition were no match for the Mustang, the plane that changed the war forever. The March 6, 1944 raid marked a new era. From that day onward, no German pilot could feel safe in the sky. The Luftwaffe would never recover its former strength. The P-51 Mustang flew on, relentless, precise, and unstoppable, proof that sometimes the outcome of war is decided not by tactics alone, but by engines, numbers, and the power of an entire nation mobilized to fight in the air. Thanks for watching this journey through one of World War II's pivotal moments. If you were shocked by the scale and precision of the Mustang raid, hit like, subscribe, and click the bell so you never miss a story that reveals the real moments that shaped history. Share your thoughts below. What would you have done if you were in Galland's cockpit that day?